This intro may be a little bit long, but bear with me. Stick with me. I did get my hair cut. And I just wanted to tell you a quick story. I'm filming this on Sunday, and my family and I just went out to breakfast. And my my husband says, "No, I like your hair." And he's always told me it's not that he doesn't mind that I get my hair cut really short, but he likes it, and I look good, and whatever, on and on. But he looked at me and he's like, "I like how you did it." He's like, "Your grays are coming through." And I'm like, "What the F does that, what is that supposed to mean?" And he's like, "No, it looks good. I like how it's peppered throughout with your grays." And I'm just the stare of death. He's like, "It looks nice. I like it." Hey Booktube, it's Kim at middle of the book march, and I have a tag video today, Tag Tuesday. I'm not rebelling today. I thought I would post this on a Tuesday because I actually have a second video coming out on Thursday. So yeah, you'll see my face more often than you normally do. Yay! This is a tag. This is the evolution of a reader tag, which is an original tag done by Jack at Spread Book Joy. If you are not familiar with her channel, go and follow the link down below immediately. She is a wonderful, smart, warm booktuber, and I just love watching her channel. I have to admit, not all of our book taste matches, but it doesn't have to. Her personality and her intelligence and just her presence is awesome. So I urge you to go and watch her channel. So she did the evolution of a reader tag, and this is another one of those best tags that is all chatting and nobody has to go and gather a pile of books because I'm lazy and I love those tags. So let's get started. There are 4 prompts, and the first one is what you read. How has your taste in books evolved? Now, this would be very easy to talk about in taking Booktube into consideration. So as of we're almost in November as I'm filming this, but I will have been on Booktube for 3 years in December. So if I think about it in purely in terms of Booktube, and actually that's one of the other questions that I'll talk about more, but it could be a very easy answer, but I'm going to take a look at this in my lifetime of reading. So how has my reading evolved? How has my taste in books evolved? Oh, it's completely different. I'm a lifelong reader. I was reading since I was a little child, and my mother taught me to read fairly early. I wouldn't have described myself as a reader until I was, 8, 9, 10 years old. And I used to love Trixie Belden mysteries. And I remember consuming those one after another after another. And so I was reading as a young child. And as I've said in previous videos, the scholastic book orders at school were my favorite times ever in school. Is just getting those little paper catalogs and the order forms and going through it, begging my mother to let me order a few books. And she always let me. And so when the books got delivered, I always received 3 or 4 books, and it was just glorious. As I grew older, I started, I got into all kinds of things. When I was in middle school and high school, I started reading things like Little Women. I read The Hobbit in middle school, which absolutely sparked my love of fantasy. But I kept reading. I read some more classics, and I was the kid who, whenever we got assigned reading in English class in high school, I was just giddy with excitement. Even if I ended up not liking the book, I'm talking about you, Joseph Conrad, I still liked the assigned reading. I don't like assigned reading anymore. Different issue. And it goes on and on and on, but I was always reading. By the time I got to college level, my college career was all over the place. So I wasn't a traditional 4-year and graduate student. It took me years and years to get my bachelor's degree. And so when I was working and I had my own disposable income, I was buying Danielle Steele romance novels in hardcover. Of course, back then, back in the olden days, I could buy a hardcover for $17. Still, at the time, that was really pricey. But I didn't care. I would sit at the bookstore waiting for the brand new Danielle Steele romance novel to come out. It got to the point where I don't remember the title, but I picked up a romance novel, Danielle Steele, and part of the plot was a woman falling in love with her rapist. And at that point, I said, no, I'm all done with Danielle Steele. There was no way I could support a storyline of like that. So I stopped reading Danielle Steele. Around the same time was when I first started getting into John Irving novels. The World According to Garp, The Hotel New Hampshire, all of his early novels. So I started reading all of those and collecting those. And my reading just kept developing from there. It was not easy to read in a higher volume at that time in my life. I got married pretty young. I was 23 when I first got married. I had my oldest daughter when I was 24. And as any of us who are parents and who have been parents to toddlers knows, it is really difficult to read when you have small children crawling around, running around. And so there was a long period in life where I wasn't able to read as much as I wanted to, but I still read. And, you know, the older I got, I started reaching for different types of books. I can say with confidence that as my older daughter got into childhood, that my reading matured and I started looking for different types of reading. I was usually reading commercial fiction or historical fiction, but it just kept evolving from there. It just matured. And I had times when I was going back to school. I didn't have a lot of time. But I also was looking into New York Times book reviews. I was looking for ideas. I was getting suggestions at bookstores. And so it just kind of grew and matured, and I wanted to have a different outlook. I wanted to start to look for new things. And I think for any of us who are lifelong readers, it's kind of just an organic thing that happens to our reading life. Number 2, how you read. Has the format of your reading changed much? Before the advent of the e-readers, it was all hard copy books. And I've always been a bigger fan of hardcovers. I just like the heft. I like the extra space. I like the size of the font. And so if I could get hardcovers, that's what I would prefer to read. Of course, I read any type of physical book. There was a day when it was easier to read mass market paperbacks, not really anymore because the print is just too small and too compact. And I was actually one of the last of my friends to buy an e-reader, and I just tried to rebel as long as I could. And so I was late to the e-reader game. And my first one was a Kindle. And the minute I started to explore ebooks, at the time I was hooked. And at this time I was well into my book club, the Critical Chicks book group. And so most of us started reading electronically. And it was, pretty much years that I would buy ebooks and electronic books, take out books from the library when that started. I still read hard copy books, but most often I was e-reading. Now, when my second daughter, Clara, was born, she was probably 2, 3, 4 years old. And I always read children's books to her since she was a baby. So she had her own little bookshelf. And I would read on my e-reader all the time, and I would read on the couch, and I would encourage her to read her books, and I would read to her. We would all read to her. And then eventually she kind of lost interest in books. And there was one day where I was sitting on the couch, and I was reading on my Kindle, and I said, hey, why don't we read some books? And she's like, no, I don't want to read. And I said, how come? She's like, I don't really like it that much. And I'm like, oh, I think it's a lot of fun. And she's like, I don't see you read. I said, I read every day. And she said, I don't see you read any books. And it occurred to me that she was seeing me staring at a screen every day. And so I embarked on an experiment where I put down my Kindle and I started reading paper books again, especially in front of her. And I didn't say anything. And then eventually she would ask me, Mama, what are you reading? And I would talk about the books I was reading. And she would kind of go into her room and pull out a child's book, and I would sit with her and we would read. And that kicked off a renewed interest in reading for her. And I thought this is so profound. Children become readers if there are books available and we model reading for them, and we model how much fun and how much joy we take out of reading. And that was a very profound experience for me. And since that time, I have preferred to read physical books. And it just evolved for me that I just started liking them more again. It was kind of a physical book renaissance for me. I still have an e-reader. I still use it. I just simply don't take as much joy out of it as I used to. I often use it for library books, and I also use it for bargain books. But often I'll buy a book on my Kindle that I don't particularly want to keep in my home library on my shelf, and that works out really well. Number 3, how much do you read? Do you read more or less than previously? When do you read? I read an enormous amount compared to what I used to read previously. When Clara was a year and a half, 2009, I embarked on graduate school, and I did that part-time. So I took 2 classes at a time. This was going to seminary. And it was 2 classes at a time. Once in a while, I would take a class over the summer. I got my first of 2 degrees 7 years later. And then in 2017, I received my Master of Divinity degree. So in 8 years, I barely read a book for pleasure. It was difficult to read my book club book, which was usually 1 book a month. I could barely keep up with that. And I was reading constantly for classes. So it was all assigned reading. Over the summer, if I didn't have a class, I would pack in as many books as possible. And so most of them were books that were for book group. But I would just try to read as much as I possibly could before the summer ended. After graduating, it took me a good 6 months to kind of recover from being in constant study. And then I started picking up books again, and my reading exploded. My joy came back. I started reading so much more. I read every day, which I still do, and it's completely different now. It's just... There's so many reasons that reading brings me joy, but not having to read certain things and reading what I choose to pull off my shelf, it's joyful. When do I read? All the time. I read whenever I can. I read early in the morning after my daughter gets on the bus and before I have to get ready for work. I read when I'm at work. I read during lunch. I read at breaks. I read when I come home and I'm working from home if I have downtime. I read when workday is done. I read at night. I read everywhere. I always either have a book with me or I have my phone with my Kindle app if I've got an ebook going or an audiobook. I read whenever I have time. I get the most reading done at night when I'm at home, usually right before dinner and right after dinner is when I get the most reading done. I don't usually read right before bed because I do fall asleep almost immediately, so I don't get a lot of reading done. And the last prompt is number 4. How has Booktube changed you as a reader? It has completely transformed me. I look back now and I realize I kind of had a type of book that I would read. It was almost always a novel, historical fiction, contemporary fiction, and I never ran out of things to read, but I started to realize I was reading a lot of titles that were pretty mainstream. Once in a while, I would slip a classic in there. Booktube has completely upended my reading. I now read things I never would have discovered without Booktube. I never would have discovered without watching wonderful creators who read completely differently than me. I never would have discovered translated fiction. I never would have discovered fiction from around the world. I never would have read certain authors that were completely unlike me. I have just searched out books written from different countries, different races, different genders, different sexualities. I don't believe I would have ever found those books without Booktube. I have found so many books that I fell in love with because of Booktube. I've found books that my Booktube friends in the UK have recommended that I never would have found. I have discovered so many authors, so many American authors that I just were never on my radar. And I have to thank Booktube for that. Once I discovered there was a whole community of people talking about books on YouTube, my mind was just opened. The light came on, the clouds parted, and my life, not just my reading life, but my life is so much richer because of Booktube. And I continue to mature. I read so much more. I can't even begin to describe how much more I read, and it surprises me how much more reading I fit in, what I've done actively to make more time for reading, the different things I reach for, reading more than one book at a time. I never used to do that. I read more than one book at a time all the time now. So I listen to audiobooks far more often. Everything has changed. Everything. My whole life, not just my reading life. The friends that I've met from Booktube, AJ, Karen, Heidi, the friends I continue to hope to meet, just everything. Life has changed. Life is so much richer, so much better, more joy, more contentment, more everything. So I'm bringing a tear to my own eye. Those are the 4 prompts. The last one is to tag some people. Jack tagged a lot of people, so I'm not going to tag anybody in particular. If you don't know if you've been tagged, or if you haven't seen a tag notification come up, please do the tag. And this is a wonderful one with just chatting about reading and your life. So I had a lot of fun answering the questions. I would love to hear your answers. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye, everybody.